In a previous video, I made a point about certain things that I'm not really comfortable in advising, and that includes compound bows, but especially cheap compound bows. In other videos, I have made points about how much you should expect to pay for your first set of bow equipment. But despite that, I still get a lot of requests and questions about cheap bow kits that people find online. And I really want to make a point in this video about how this low budget mentality can be harmful in your enjoyment and experience of archery. Generally, I gently push people away from buying the cheap options and instead get something decent. Now, if you go to a store or if you go to a manufacturer, you'll probably get the same advice, and obviously there are business interests. But if you go to a shop or coach, they will generally advise you the same thing. Don't buy crap equipment. I keep on getting questions and emails and messages on Facebook asking about these eBay bows. And to me, it's like asking me which piece of crap is better. They're both crap. You're pissing money into things that you won't enjoy shooting. And look, you probably won't shoot it. You'll probably just leave it in your garage for 5 years. Don't do this to yourself. Because so many people are budget conscious, I'll explain this in terms of money. I conceptualize this in two ways. There are entry-level bows which encourage growth and development. And there are just bows. They exist for the sole purpose of fulfilling a short-term thrill. The problem with these just bows is that they have an inflated number of reviews online. One, because they're really cheap, and two, they work. That's not saying much. Let's start with recurve bows. If you want to start off with a decent entry-level recurve, you should budget at least $200 US. This will get you most wooden takedown recurves, such as the Samick Sage, the Samick Polaris, the SF Optima Plus, the Fuse Focus, the PEC Razorback. All these bows are very similar. These look and feel and handle like real bows because they are real bows. This should be your minimum baseline when looking at buying your first bow. Beyond this price point, you're looking at high quality hunting bows with different wood and high quality finish. Some of them even have smooth draws and clean releases. Beyond this, even further, you have the more specialized bows like the metal hunting bows or the target bows, which are made from aluminium and carbon technology, and all the accessories that come with a fancy bow. If you go under the $100 price point, you start looking at bows like this. These are the really cheap fiberglass recurve bows. They are really cheap. I'm talking about $50 or less. And look, if you're looking at having a bow that you're just going to use to plink at targets in your backyard, then these bows are fine. There are bows like the PSE Snake, which are often recommended for beginners because they cost around $75 US. They're ambidextrous, they're like this one. They can be used by anybody. They're really cheap and easy to buy, a good entry point. The problem is that they don't really go much further than that. It's just a bow which we'll use in the short term. So if you're buying these bows for a singular purpose, such as doing a project, they're fine. But if you're looking at making progress, these bows are very limited. They don't encourage you to be a better archer. What you get with these bows is limited options. But for example, you can't put much on it. No stabilizers, no sights, no options. It is a very flimsy bow. You won't feel anything solid, very thin grip, very simplistic designs, a lot of vibration, a lot of hand shock. So usability is very limited. While you can use it, it's just not satisfying to use. Even issues like the way the riser is cut. Often these bows are made to be ambidextrous, so there's not enough clearance in the riser window for the arrow to go through, so you will often have arrows coming out really poorly. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking, look, I just want a bow to buy so I can learn with. And that's fine. I understand that these bows are really appealing because, you just want to have the basics of getting your archery form. And I get that. The problem is that you can do the same thing with a $120 wooden recurve. This thing is a dead end. You're just wasting money. If you are trying to progress in archery, you may as well learn on a wooden recurve. Clubs don't use these bows. They use the wooden recurves or the metal basic beginner recurves because for $50 more, you get a bow that handles like a real bow. And it's really fun to use. This isn't. This is just like a toy. The $150 recurves are what you want as a basic beginner recurve. And for a lot of people, it may be their first and only bow because it fulfills all their needs in one package. Not this one-off set of training wheels which will throw away in 3 weeks, but an actual bow which functions on the target range, even on the hunting fields where you have a bow that fulfills your needs. If you buy a $150 wooden recurve, you have a bow that you can grow and develop with. This kind of bow is only useful if you only just want a bow. By the way, if you are seriously strapped for cash but you still want to have a go at archery, you may want to consider do-it-yourself projects like making PVC bows. There are lots of tutorials on the internet, including the channel Backyard Boy on YouTube, and they provide lots of resources on how you can get started on making your own equipment using easy to find resources. This may in fact be your kind of thing. You may find it's quite fun, and you can get into archery in a very low budget. Okay, compound bows. Compound bows are a little different because they tend to be more expensive than recurve bows. Because of this, more people are driven to find cheaper options. If you are buying a compound bow for the first time, I recommend that you budget at least $400 US. This will get you practically any bow in the beginner to intermediate range, including bows like the Diamond Infinite Edge. These bows are very useful and flexible because they have a variety of draw weight and draw lengths, which allows you to grow with your bow. If you go below $300, you're starting to get into the unknown territory of cheap Chinese knockoffs. Now, there is a huge market for these because so many people want to start archery while only paying $100 or $200. So you get a lot of these cheap manufactured knockoff bows. They're very poor quality control, very poor quality of equipment, so very cheap parts which break easily. Archery stores don't stock these items for a reason. These bows are marketed straight to the consumer on Amazon or eBay. These bows look and feel terrible. These are literally just metal risers with wheels on the end, and they're called compound bows. Even the more expensive models are simply the same thing in a fancier shape. I'm not saying these bows will blow up in your hand, but they're just really bad quality bows. The vibration and shock are very high. The accessories barely function. I mean, really, these bows are there to give you the illusion of shooting like a professional. What is dangerous is the mentality that comes with buying these bows. Now, I'm going to profile a certain demographic in the archery community. Not all people are like this, but I've seen so many people who fall into this stereotype that I have to make a point of it. You get men with this macho complex. They do gym 3-4 times a week, with these huge shoulders and arms, and they go, you know what? I feel like some shooting and hunting. So they go on eBay and they find these really cheap compound bows because they're the highest on the search list. And they come in camo, so it looks really tough. And look, it goes up to 70 pounds, so you're super manly. Then they get their bow and they're like, oh my god, it's such a cool bow. And then they pretend they're Robin Hood or Oliver Queen. They do some poses, they make a new Facebook profile picture, and they'll try to impress girls with their bow. That's what they do, I'm not kidding, I've seen this. They try to impress people with their $100 bow off eBay. And then they go for a beer and they shoot kangaroos. I'll go as far as to say that these clueless purchases are meant for your ego. You have a bow, not many people have a bow, so you are officially the coolest kid on the block. And you know what? You don't see this kind of person at the club, because this kind of person hates being around people who are better than they are. Of course, archers have better equipment. They know what they're doing. And these cheap compound buyers, these impulse buyers, they don't want to be told what to do. They'd rather hang out with their mates on their uncle's farm and shoot rabbits. This compound kit from eBay has been sent to me many times. It's from a Tunga. It's $140 Australian, and nearly 500 have been sold. That's a lot of bows. That's the power of online shopping. But I want to make a point of how little value you are getting from this kit. You get an extreme compound bow, one of the simplest and cheapest designs you can possibly find in a compound. This bow is barely worth $70. You get an aiming device, a piece of plastic with 2 movable pins. This is so cheap and fragile that it barely deserves to be called a sight. Instead of getting a decent drop-away rest, you get this really cheap, generic, leaf-shaped rest, which is mostly used for recurves. You get this small, cheap finger tab, and the cheapest kind too. Like, this isn't a fancy finger tab they use for recurves. It's literally a bit of fur or leather which you stick your middle finger through. Look, most compound bows are meant to be shot with a digger loop and a release aid. I know some people do shoot off the fingers on a compound, and that's completely fine, but it is slightly more risky if you don't know what you're doing. As a beginner, you really should be encouraged to use a mechanical release aid. That's half the point of a compound. If you don't want to, that's your choice. But again, if you're buying a kit and this is all you're given, I think that's really poor. You get a wrist guard. I mean, it's so small, it only covers your wrist, of course. You get 3 arrows. Generic arrows. Not brand names like Eastern or Carbon Express. Just generic Chinese arrows with no name. These are probably fiberglass or carbon if you're lucky, and they'll be way too stiff. But 3 arrows. And finally you get a target face. If you have a problem with this kind of bow and you bring it to the club or to the shop, more than likely you will be told to buy a new bow. You have seriously just wasted $150 on something which you can't get spare parts for, that people won't repair because it's so unknown and cheap and unreliable. You could have saved this $150 on a decent bow. Like, you're really doing yourself no favors by going so low on the budget. You really want a bow that you can grow into and grow with. These bows won't let you do that. They are poor bows. They are a poor man's bow. They function, yes, but you won't learn with these bows. Nothing you do with these bows will make you a better archer. And you are better off skipping this bow and buying something that you actually want to use. Because many people who buy these bows will simply give it up after a few weeks and will never use them again. Don't be this kind of person. Oh, and please don't buy those cheap Chinese bulk arrows off eBay. I know this is mentality of, oh, I'm a beginner, so I'm going to lose a lot of arrows, so therefore I'm going to buy lots of cheap arrows so I don't feel bad when I break them. You are losing arrows because you are using cheap arrows. You need to buy a decent dozen arrows that are matched to your draw weight. Only then will you start seeing consistency and straight flight. These cheap fiberglass or carbon, if you're lucky, arrows, made from China, sold on eBay for $60 for 24 something. These are really poor arrows. They give the impression of a high quality arrow because they're shiny, fiberglass or carbon, but really they don't have any of the characteristics which make a good arrow. For one thing, they are rated up to say 40 pound or 60 pound, and that is BS. There is no arrow that is so versatile that you can shoot it from a 60 pound compound and a 20 pound recurve. You need to use the right arrows. Usually these arrows are too thick and too stiff, which means they'll flop around like a wet noodle. In fact, one of our new members made this mistake. He bought this fantastic package, the SF Forge Plus beautiful bow, with no arrows. So he bought eBay arrows. This was an honest error. You can't blame him, but it was a mistake. These arrows were too stiff, they were too thick for his arrow rest, and he couldn't use them. There just wasn't a point in using arrows that don't fly straight. And this is the point I'm trying to get at with this trend of buying cheap equipment. I know that people want to invest as little as possible into a sport they might not enjoy. And I understand this, but you are limiting yourself by getting equipment that doesn't allow you to progress and feel that development. You are buying things which are stopping you from becoming a better archer, and that will turn people off. I know some people do progress from a cheap plastic bow to a decent bow, and that's fair, but most people won't. For most people, a bow is a one-off purchase, and if you buy the cheapest possible recurve or the cheapest possible compound, then you are unlikely to buy a better one if you didn't enjoy this one. And because you bought the cheapest one, you probably won't enjoy it. If you want to experience archery and you have a very low budget, there are a couple of alternatives that you may choose. The one I recommend is to find your nearest club and look at basic beginner sessions. This may be all you will ever need. If you want to get a decent bow but not break the bank, you may want to look at used equipment. There is a lot of stuff floating around because people will get into the sport, they'll buy new bows, they might get out of the sport. There's plenty of stuff lying around, and you can buy quality equipment for a fraction of the price. If you just want a bow, that's fine, buy what you want. But look, if you ask for my opinion, I'm not going to recommend cheap eBay bows made from generic unknown Chinese manufacturers. These bows don't give you that satisfaction of using a bow. It's a one-off purchase. I've seen so many people buy these bows and never use them, and to me, I think I'd be doing you a disservice if I said these bows are remotely viable. Avoid these bows. You aren't doing yourself any favors. I don't want you to have a poor archery experience. And the last thing you want to do is to buy equipment, to invest money in equipment that will frustrate you. Remember, you don't need a bow to start archery. If you know what you're doing, then get a bow. But don't jump into buying the cheapest thing that you can get. You will get what you pay for. And if you don't want to have a disappointing, frustrating experience, save that money and buy a bow when you feel comfortable. Anyway, this is New Sensei. Hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.